We'll take you to the Bronze period in this video, to the Trojan War, the greatest struggle in human history. In this mythological age of heroes, many rulers and soldiers would become immortalized by this fight. Men were so adept with the blade that their companions believed them to be gods. In any case, let's watch the video. Around that time, circa 1200 or 1300 BC, Memnon would have been created. Even his birth circumstances were legendary. Tithonus was a prince of Troy who was the father of Memnon. Tithonus was abducted by the goddess of the dawn Eos and brought to the Oceanus in Greek mythology. Or perhaps the prince of Troy was an old wanderer who would look for far-off regions because most of the map was blank because the world had not yet been discovered. Eos, a goddess, would give birth to Memnon, a hybrid of a man and a god. He will shortly ascend to the position of king of Ethiopia. This region, which lay south of Egypt, included what is now northern Sudan, as well as modern-day Ethiopia. His prowess with the sword would be comparable to that of the greatest warriors of all time, such as Heracles and Achilles, due to his talent in the art of warfare. Memnon oversaw a strong army and governed a big kingdom. The loss of numerous poems detailing this warrior's life has left us with few details about his life. In the east, Memnon would likewise subdue powerful kingdoms. He was once said to have married a Trojan queen and was also characterized as a gorgeous man. We now bring you to the Trojan War's culmination, which occurred in the 10th year of the conflict. A 1-versus-1 fight would be fought between Hector, the champion of Troy, and Achilles, the Greek champion. Hector lost in this duel and died. Without a military commander, Troy was thus left defenseless and vulnerable. The king of Troy, Priam, begged the gods to intervene on his behalf during his most trying time. After hearing his cries, the gods instructed Memnon to depart Ethiopia to help Troy. Memnon likely maintained close contact with them because he was a prince of Troy's son and had married a queen of Troy. The news would have reached Memnon in Ethiopia because the war between the Greeks and the Trojans lasted for 10 long years. Memnon would assemble his troops and advance toward Troy. Upon his arrival, the city was unable to handle all of his terrifyingly intimidating army, and many of the troops were forced to set up camp outside the city gates. After a disagreement in which the leaders of Troy argued about whether or not he would appear at all, Memnon entered the city. When he arrived, Priam prepared a big supper in his honor. The army was said to be too large to count. Memnon and Priam would talk for hours about their previous victories in battle. Priam said that he would undoubtedly save Troy and exterminate the Greeks as a result of Memnon's tales. Memnon, however, was a very modest guy and refrained from bragging at the banquet because he believed it would be foolish to do so. According to legend, the gods greatly loved Memnon, and Zeus instructed all other Olympians to stand aside and refrain from interfering in the next fights so that Memnon might demonstrate his fighting prowess. The day after the supper, both armies, the Greeks on one side and the Trojans and Ethiopians on the other, the Greeks were attacked by Memnon and his troops, and a bloody battle resulted. According to legend, the king of Ethiopia rode a chariot and slew everyone who stood in his way. Memnon would eventually abandon his chariot and engage the Greeks in combat until he came face to face with the terrifying Antilochus. Nestor, the king of Pylos, had a son named Antilochus who was a fierce fighter. The two warriors engaged in combat, but Memnon would eventually murder Antilochus. A great Greek hero had just been defeated. The Greeks were on the edge of defeat when the battle's tides changed after Antilochus's death, sending them fleeing in terror back to their ships. As the war continued, Memnon was asked to a duel by Nestor, the father of Antilochus, but declined, saying it wouldn't be fair to fight such an old man. This portrays the warrior ideals of Memnon. He kills when necessary to a worthy opponent, but he does not kill simply for the purpose of killing. Nestor, still grieving and furious at the loss of his son, was able to locate Achilles on the battlefield as the Greek army was about to be driven into the sea by the Trojans and Ethiopians. Achilles would comply when Nestor instructed him to exact revenge for the passing of his friend and neighbor's kid. Achilles later discovered Memnon on the battlefield and issued a challenge to a duel. Memnon accepted the duel after learning about the legendary warrior Achilles. The two heroes were comparable in strength, favor with the gods, and rumors of being demigods. The Olympians decided not to assist either of them and to pay close attention to the fight, because such a skilled and quick combat would never occur on Earth again. Men gathered around the two champions as the fight came to an end to watch them engage in what would go down in history as the greatest duel. Zeus is reported to have projected the two men as giants so that everyone on the battlefield and the Olympians above could see the entire epic conflict. The two demigods then engaged in combat, and the speed and skill of their maneuvers would astound both gods and men because they appear to be impossible to imitate. A protracted battle would ensue between Memnon and Achilles. Despite failing to deliver a fatal blow, Memnon managed to cause the invincible Achilles to bleed as a result of his quick attacks. Achilles overcame Memnon, piercing Memnon's body with his spear after driving it through the latter's shield. He was then vulnerable to attack as a result. Achilles then pierced Memnon's heart with his sword. The demigod and champion of Troy, the king of Ethiopia, lay dead on the battlefield. His entire army fled in fright as a result of this. Memnon was so revered by Achilles and the Greeks that they built a funeral pyre for him. However, some of Memnon's men had stayed to retrieve their leader's body, and they buried him and placed him in a tomb. Then Memnon was made immortal by Zeus, the ruler of the gods. It is unclear if this meant that Memnon's name was immortalized, if he was raised from the dead, or if Memnon was mummified, in which case his corpse would have been preserved. In addition to being the king of Ethiopia, it has been suggested that he was also the pharaoh of Egypt. If this is true, his troops may have remained in Troy to embalm their deceased monarch. There should be a lot more material available on this renowned warrior, but we only have pieces of the poems and literature that describe his early life and his death. I think that this knowledge was destroyed when the Library of Alexandria, which was the finest library ever and arguably the greatest library in history, was burned. That's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it just as I've enjoyed making it. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our great content, and as always, stay safe.